Welcome to Write That Book Now, Strategies for Becoming an Author. This is a three-part series for new and emerging writers. Part 1, Starting, looks at the challenges writers face that prevent them from writing and suggests 7 things they can do to overcome those challenges. Part 2, Writing, covers what you should consider when writing and how to set up the right environment to get the most out of your writing. Part 3, Finishing, deals with knowing when to step away from your manuscript and discusses your options for publishing. This is Part 3, Finishing, presented by Shelly-Ann Edwards-Barron.
So today we're talking about finishing the manuscript. How do you know when it's time to stop? Writing conclusions, what to do next, and a little bit about the publishing in Trinidad and Tobago, especially the difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing, so that you can have an idea of what to do when you finish with your manuscript. So I'm going to begin with the question, how do you know when it's time to stop writing? Now, of course, if you're working with a deadline, you will know when it's time to stop because your deadline is approaching and you have other things to do like editing and so on. But what happens when you don't have a deadline? What you can do is look at your outline. Now, of course, if you're working with an outline, when you've completed all the phases in the outline, then you know, well, okay, it's time to stop because you've done everything you set out to do. You can also consider, okay, if you're adding and adding and adding, look at what you're adding. And if what you're adding has gotten to a point where it's not really adding value to the manuscript, then you know it's time to stop. And then, of course, sometimes you have to work with your gut feeling, because you might be working on something and you have this gut feeling that says, listen, it's time to stop. I'll work with what I have right now, and I can always do a sequel or a follow-up book to work with this one. All right, so the 3 things that can help you to know when it's time to stop: 1, your outline; 2, when additions aren't bringing any value; and 3, sometimes you just know, okay, it's time to stop. Knowing when to stop is one thing, but knowing how to write that conclusion is quite another matter altogether. Sometimes the end doesn't present itself as easily as you would like, but there are things that you can do to work it out and have a good ending to your story or whatever work you're working on. One thing you need to keep in mind is that conclusions really do matter. Remember, this is the last interaction you're going to be having with your audience in this book, and what you tell them in the end is going to make a big difference in how they viewed the entire content that they've read so far. For fiction, completing your story arc is the main thing. Now, of course, in the beginning of the story, where you established what was happening, and the rising action where you had all the conflict and so on, and then the climax, you would have introduced issues and topics of interest to the main character that your readers would need to find out about. So, questions would have been asked and questions would have come up in their mind. So, of course, your conclusion, what you need to think about is how many of those questions are you going to answer, or are you going to hint that the major questions are still going to be answered in a sequel or a second part to the story? So your resolution and falling action, which is the conclusion of your fiction, really works with what came before. And what you're looking at is answering the questions that were raised in the minds of the readers as they were going through the story up to that point. With nonfiction, things are a little different. And that's because the purpose of your writing is going to be a little different with nonfiction. Now, with fiction, you're most likely, the main focus is to entertain, regardless of what type of entertainment you're aiming for. But with nonfiction, your purpose might be to educate or to inform or to motivate someone. So at the end of your writing, these are some of the questions that you need to think about answering. For example, if you are writing a biographical story, somebody's life, true story, then what happened after the main event is something that a lot of people might be interested in. If you're writing something motivational or inspiring and you used a storyline to work it, then why should people care about any of this? Or maybe you're writing something to inspire people to action. Of course, if you're inspiring them to action after you've motivated and inspired them and they're all energized, don't leave them hanging. What you need to do then is to tell them what to do next. Now, there are different types of endings. You could simply say that you're not sure what's going to happen in the future, because if you're writing a true story, for example, then and you got to the point of the present, you could identify plans, but we don't know the future, so we can't say exactly what is going to happen. Now, of course, you don't have to choose one or the other necessarily. It depends on the type of work you're working with. So you might end up with a combination ending. For example, you might say where they are now, why we should care about where they are now, and then what they are going to do next and what we should do next as readers. So you could mix and match as necessary based on the type of writing you're doing and the purpose of your writing. Okay, so you've done your duty, you've completed everything, you've said all that you wanted to say, and you have your completed manuscript. What's next? What do you do once you have that manuscript in your hand and you want to get it published, but it's not in a publishable format just yet? There are three things that you should do and think about as you go toward the stage from manuscript to published book. The first is to find and work with an editor. Of course, we've discussed in this entire series why you need an editor, and it might seem challenging and difficult to locate an editor, but you don't necessarily have to go with a seasoned professional right off if it's your first book. If you're a little timid, you might want to work with a friend and family, someone who is very good with English. Basically, what you really want is a fresh pair of eyes that looks at your manuscript from a perspective that you don't have, so that they could point out various aspects of the manuscript that might need polishing or changing, or that might be confusing to your readers. But of course, engaging a professional editor is the best way to go, because this editor would have experience and would understand certain things about meeting your audience that your friend and family may not have. Of course, confidentiality and trust is a big thing, so that you want to ask your editor questions and make sure that you are comfortable with the editor. And of course, keep in contact with your editor. If you're interested in finding out a little bit more about editing and finding editors, you can visit our Facebook page, Word Coach Limited on Facebook. There are a couple of videos there where we interviewed an editor, and she shares some of her ideas and thoughts about editing and the editing process, so that you could understand how things can work with an editor. You can also feel free to contact us, and we can walk you through the editing process and give you further guidance on what to do next. So you don't have to feel that you're lost or that you're missing something. We're here to help you. All right, the next thing is dealing with how you're going to publish. There are three types of publishing, if you want to call it that. The traditional publishing, there's self-publishing, and hybrid or combination publishing. Now, the pros and cons. Traditional publishing, there's a certain sense of credibility in it, because it's established and people feel like, hey, I'm going to really publish my book. I'm not doing this myself. I'm working with the professionals. Traditional publishers also have sort of inside track with distribution, because remember, they're in the business for a while, and they would have contact with bookstores and libraries and the circles that you would want your book to be distributed in. And of course, if you get a really good contract, you can be paid advances and so on with a traditional publisher, because they see value in your book, so they pay you an advance, and then when your book is sold, they pay you royalties and those kinds of things. So there are pros regarding the traditional publishing. However, with traditional publishing, you need an agent. Regardless of what type of manuscript you're working with, once you're working with a traditional large publisher, they're not going to be dealing with the authors directly, so they won't deal with you directly. You are going to have to hire an agent. And then there is a consideration of ownership. Who owns the manuscript? Who owns the book at the end of the day? Because if they're going to be putting forward money for marketing and all those things, by the time you're finished with all of that, you may only get a small percentage of the sales of the book. And then, of course, there's the time. It takes time to deal with the traditional publishing. You would have to work with an agent, and then the agent will have to shop around your book to the traditional publishers, and getting someone to accept and agree to publish your book might take some time, regardless of the quality of the book. Remember, these traditional publishers are in it for the money, and they really are only interested in what they think can sell and sell well. All right, so these are some of the pros and cons with the traditional publishing. Now, when it comes to self-publishing, I can tell you the opportunities abound. It's easier now more than ever to publish your own writing. But of course, as with everything, there are pros and cons. Now, for self-publishing, of course, you are publishing your own work, so you have complete ownership. So when it comes to royalties and so on, again, from the sale of the book, you have complete ownership of all that income coming from the sale of your book. Now, when it comes to risk, you might think that self-publishing is a pretty risky business. But of course, when you consider things like print-on-demand technology, this is when you upload your book and it is only printed when someone purchases it. It might sound like a bit of a technical thing and difficult to understand, but Amazon's Create Space is something like that. So if you upload your book to Amazon's Create Space and someone purchases your book on Amazon, that's the only time that you actually get the book printed. And what that means is that you don't have to print thousands of copies or keep an inventory, and that lowers your risk in terms of the financial aspect of going into publishing your own book. But then, of course, there are cons or challenges with printing and publishing for yourself. The first, of course, is that there is a lot of effort involved. So you are the one who has to go find an editor, you have to work with the editor, find a printer if you're going to go print immediately, format the book to the publishing standard, do all your marketing yourself. And so basically there's a lot to be done. And if you're going to do the self-publishing thing, that means that you are the one who's going to have to do it. And even though the print on demand sort of lowers the risk, the fact is that every penny that you spend toward your marketing, publishing, and everything regarding your book would have to come out of your pocket. So you'd really have to put aside for the editor, put aside for marketing, consider how long that's going to take, and there's a cost involved with all of that. And finally, the quality. Now, even though I'm saying quality is a challenge here, basically what happens is that once you get a good editor, you could minimize the challenges with quality, but there are some risks involved and some quality control issues involved, I guess, because when you look at the type of self-published books out there, there's a tendency for readers to feel that, okay, if this is self-published, it's not as good as if it was published the traditional way. Now, this is a big challenge for self-published authors because, of course, remember the traditional publishing houses have their distribution network, and if your readers are thinking, okay, this is self-published and it's not as good a quality, then what's going to happen is that marketing is going to be a lot more challenging, and this is going to, of course, affect the bottom line. Now, here is where the combination publishing comes in. Now, this is basically a writer or an author working with a printer. And what the printer does is to leverage their experience and their network in order to get you some distribution and, advice and editing and these kinds of things. But of course, you would still have to bear the brunt of upfront costs where you would pay for the printing And you would have to consider the capability of the printer, because not everyone who says they're able to give you the kind of quality that you're looking for is actually able to do this. So you would have to be very, very diligent in selection when it comes to these kinds of situations where you're working with a printer. All right. And while I did indicate that distribution was one of the pros, there is a possibility that distribution could also be a challenge, because one of the printers, for example, might print everything for you, and you have all your books and the several copies on hand, and then you have to assist with marketing, you have to contribute to everything else as if you were self-published. So there are pros and cons with all of these methods, and basically what you have to do is to look at which one is most comfortable to you. Which one do you think that you can put the time and effort in, and that would give you the best outcome for your effort in terms of publishing your manuscript? So you should note that there is a lot of help out there. The National Library, for one, offers a lot of help for new authors. They do the ISBN, so you can, if you're self-publishing, you can order your ISBN yourself. And if you want more information about that, you could go to this particular page, or you can check our Facebook page at Word Coach on Facebook, and there's an article there about self-publishing and purchasing your own ISBN numbers. Now, for the creation of your manuscript, you don't have to purchase anything fancy. You could simply use Microsoft Word, type it up like a regular document, and then of course you would want to work with a particular software to format it for the publishing, for it to look like a book and not a document per se. Now, all of these that I've listed here, Scribus, Kindle Jumpstart, Calibre, ebook management, these are all free software. Scribus, you can do print and ebook. Kindle Jumpstart is actually part of the Amazon service, where you get assistance in creating ebooks. And Calibre ebook management is also a system where you could format your ebook in a way that is industry standard, so it doesn't look like something done in a garage, even though it might have been. So you want it to look professional. So these are all programs that you can use to get your manuscript looking like a professional book, whether you're going ebook or you're going to the traditional print format. So basically what I'm saying is that finding out what to do next, especially if you want to go the self-publishing way, you should know that there are lots of resources online. Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming. There are many on-demand publishers. Create Space is available. You can search that up online. That's an Amazon thing. Kindle Direct Publishing as well is available. Again, an Amazon thing. But these services are free. There are other services like them. They're also free for you to work with in terms of getting advice and lots of material out there. But of course, if you're still not sure about what to do and where to go, give us a call, send us a message, and we will guide you as best as we can. Now, if you're going to go the self-publishing way, as we said before, consider how you will market your book. Because if you're going to publish yourself, then you are going to be the one responsible for marketing. And if no one knows about your book, then they won't know that it's available for purchase. So here are a few tips about becoming known. Remember, you're a new product, right? And people don't know about this book until you tell them about it. So one thing that you can do is to actually do a book launch. Now, there are different ways you can do this book launch. You can hire an event planner and do the book launch on your own, or you can work with the National Library. You can do a book launch at any of the libraries, but of course the Port of Spain Library has the biggest space. And what the library does, if you're doing a book launch with them, is that they send out the information through their networks to invite people to the book launch. And this, of course, is a free service through the National Library. So this is definitely one thing that you would want to consider when you're doing self-publishing. And then you can do lectures and presentations. Again, through the library service, you can do free lectures where you talk about a topic that is related to your book. And through the library service, once you're doing a free lecture with them, they would send out the information through their network. You can do your own advertising to bring people to the lecture. And then, of course, if you have your book printed already, at the end of the lecture, you mention that you have a book, and you get people engaged and interested, and they would learn about your book. You can collect emails where you could send people messages. So, this is another way that you can make yourself more known. And finally, of course, there is online. Now you can write a blog, join Facebook groups and comments, share your work on Facebook. You can even create a Facebook page for your book. And on that page, what you would do is to, put quotations from the book, talk about the reason you wrote the book, describe yourself as an author, and so on. Let people get to know you. Do page boosts and so on, so that you could share your work with literally the world. Because once you're online, anyone in the entire world can access your book. But of course, if you're going to do that and go online, you need to put the cost for your book and where people can purchase it. So sometimes it's also a good idea to have an author website where you can have the book for sale and people could purchase using credit cards and PayPal and that kind of thing. So you're not going to really be limiting yourself to access in Trinidad and Tobago, or having to get it into a bookstore or even in the library. Essentially, you can do all of your marketing and distribution online and make your book and your writing a lot more accessible. So we're at the end of this presentation and at the end of this series. And before you go on, I hope you took some time to make a note of lessons learned so that you can really move forward with more confidence in your writing and publishing. So make sure you finish that manuscript, because the world is waiting to hear what you have to say. If you need some help, you can always give us a call at Word Coach, and we would be more than willing to help you and guide you toward becoming a published author.
This presentation was brought to you by Word Coach Limited. To contact Shelly-Ann Edwards-Barron, call or message 717-4993. Like Word Coach on Facebook for more content to help you write well. Remember, words matter, so find better words. Word Coach Limited, helping you find better words.